The first sound was not a voice but the wind, rolling low across the open land like it had something to confess. It slipped through the tall grass, rattled the loose boards of the corral, and brushed against the porch posts of the old ranch house that had stood its ground longer than most people cared to remember. Evening was settling in, slow and heavy, the kind that made the sky burn orange and gold before giving up to night. Out here, silence was never empty. It watched you. It waited. She had come to the ranch with a suitcase that still smelled like bus stations and borrowed rooms. The road behind her was long and cracked, and the road ahead did not offer much more comfort. She stood near the fence line, fingers hooked into the rough wire, staring across acres of land that belonged to someone else. Land that breathed history. Land that did not forgive easily. The cattle were moving in the distance, dark shapes against the fading light, and somewhere nearby a gate creaked like an old man clearing his throat. The rancher noticed her before she noticed him. He always noticed things before they made noise. It was a habit carved into him by years of early mornings, sick calves, and storms that came without warning. He leaned against the barn door, hat low over his eyes, studying the stranger who had arrived with questions she had not yet asked. People did not come out here by accident. They came because they were running from something or toward something they could not name. She turned when she felt his stare, the way a person feels heat before they see fire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them stretched thin, tight with unsaid things. Dust clung to her shoes, and sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. The ranch did not care who they were before this moment. It only cared who they would be now. He broke the silence by asking if she was lost. His voice was calm, low, the kind that did not need to be raised to be heard. She shook her head and said she was exactly where she had been told to go. The words sounded steadier than she felt. Her life had been full of arguments lately, voices climbing over one another, breath wasted on people who never listened. Standing here, she realized how loud the world had been before the ranch quieted it. He nodded once as if confirming something he already knew. He told her the sun would be down soon and asked if she planned on staying. The question hung there, heavier than it should have been. Staying meant more than a bed or a meal. It meant stepping into a rhythm that did not bend for anyone. It meant mornings that began before light and nights that asked you to sit with your thoughts. She said she did not have much choice. The rancher did not smile, but something shifted in his eyes, like a door opening just enough to let air in. He gestured toward the house and told her supper would be ready when the stars came out. No promises. No warmth in the words. Just an offer shaped by necessity. As she followed him up the path, she noticed the way he moved, steady and sure, like the land itself had taught him how to stand. He did not look back to see if she was keeping up. He trusted that she would. That trust unsettled her more than suspicion ever had. The porch boards groaned under their weight, and the smell of coffee and wood smoke drifted out through the open door. Inside, the ranch house was simple. Worn table, straight-backed chairs, a clock that ticked loud enough to mark time like a warning. She set her suitcase down and stood there, unsure of where to put herself. The rancher poured 2 cups of coffee without asking and slid one across the table toward her. Their fingers almost touched, and the space between them felt charged, like the air before a storm breaks. They talked about the land, about fences that needed fixing and cattle that had wandered too close to the river. They did not talk about why she had come or why he lived so far from town. Those questions hovered just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to drop. Every word they exchanged felt careful, measured, like both of them were afraid that saying the wrong thing might shatter the fragile calm. As night deepened, the ranch settled into its familiar hush. Crickets took up their song, and the wind eased as if listening. She realized how aware she was of her own breathing, how loud it sounded in the quiet room. The rancher watched her over the rim of his cup, eyes steady, unreadable. When she finally spoke, it came out sharper than she intended, a half-formed argument rising out of habit. He set his cup down and leaned back in his chair. His gaze did not waver. When he spoke, his voice cut through the room, soft but firm. He told her there was no point wasting breath on words that led nowhere. He said the ranch had no patience for noise without purpose. The way he said it made her feel seen, stripped of excuses she had carried for too long. The words stayed with her long after he left her alone in the small guest room. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around her. Outside, something moved in the dark, a reminder that this land was alive and watching. She wondered what it would take to earn a place here, to stop running and start standing still. Morning came early, painted in pale light and the sound of boots on the porch. She stepped outside to find the rancher already at work, moving with the same quiet confidence as the night before. He handed her a pair of gloves without comment and pointed toward a section of fence that needed mending. There was no discussion, no easing her into the work. The ranch did not offer comfort. It offered truth. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher and sweat traced slow lines down her back. Her hands ached, but there was something grounding in the labor, something honest. They worked side by side without speaking, the space between them filled with shared effort instead of words. Every so often, their eyes met, and in those brief moments, she felt a pull she could not explain. By late afternoon, a storm began to build on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled in, heavy with promise. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of rain and earth. She looked to him, unsure whether to keep working or seek shelter. He studied the sky, jaw set, then nodded toward the barn. They moved quickly, the air thick with urgency. Inside the barn, the sound of rain on the roof was deafening. Water dripped through old seams, and the smell of hay filled her lungs. They stood too close, pressed together by the narrow space and the sudden rush of weather. Her heart hammered, and she was acutely aware of every breath she took. The argument she had been holding on to all her life rose up again, ready to spill out. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing beneath the storm. His voice was low, meant only for her, and it cut through the noise like a blade. He told her to hush now. He told her there were moments when silence mattered more than being right. His words did not feel like an order. They felt like an invitation. The storm raged on, and the barn creaked under its weight. She stood there, caught between the urge to speak and the pull to stay quiet, to listen to something deeper than her own thoughts. The rancher watched her, waiting, the question unspoken but clear. Outside, thunder rolled, and the land held its breath. She did not know yet whether she would argue or surrender to the quiet he offered. All she knew was that whatever choice she made would change more than just this moment. The rain began to ease, but the tension between them did not. As the storm passed and the light shifted, she realized the ranch was no longer just a place she had come to. It was a line she had crossed, and there was no turning back. The rain left the ground dark and breathing, steam lifting off the dirt as if the land itself was letting out a long-held sigh. When they finally stepped out of the barn, the world felt washed clean but heavier somehow. The sky stayed low and gray, stretched tight across the horizon, and the air clung to skin and clothes. She wiped her hands on her jeans, unsure where to look, while the rancher turned back to his work as if nothing had happened. That quiet unsettled her more than raised voices ever could. They finished securing the last of the tools without speaking. He moved with practiced ease, every action shaped by routine and memory. She followed his lead, watching more than doing, learning how the ranch communicated without words. When he finally nodded toward the house, she felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Whatever had passed between them in the barn stayed there, suspended like dust in sunlight. Supper that night was plain and filling. Beans, bread, meat cooked slow. They ate at the same worn table, the clock marking each second with stubborn insistence. She wanted to ask questions about the ranch, about him, about why he looked at the land like it had once betrayed him. Instead, she spoke about smaller things, the bus ride, the weather in town, things that felt safe. He listened, eyes steady, offering short replies that revealed little. Later, she stepped out onto the porch alone. Night had settled in deep, stars sharp and bright against the dark sky. The land stretched out endlessly, quiet but not empty. Somewhere in the distance, an animal called out, answered by another farther away. She hugged her arms around herself, feeling the weight of how far she was from anything familiar. The ranch did not soften at night. It grew more honest. Her sleep came in pieces. Dreams tangled with memory, faces from her past drifting in and out like ghosts. Arguments replayed themselves, words thrown like stones, all of it loud and exhausting. Each time she woke, the ranch house was still, the silence pressing close. By morning she felt worn thin, as if the night had taken something from her and refused to give it back. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that demanded her full attention, mending fences, feeding cattle, learning which gates stuck and which ones swung free. The rancher spoke when needed, his instructions clear and direct. He never hovered, never corrected more than necessary. When she made mistakes, he let her fix them. That quiet expectation weighed on her shoulders, but it also steadied her. She began to notice details she had missed before. The way the land sloped gently toward the river. The scar of an old fire line cutting across the far field. A section of fence that looked newer than the rest, boards still pale against weathered wood. When she asked about it, he shrugged and said storms came through harder than people expected. His answer felt practiced, and she sensed there was more beneath it. One afternoon, they rode out together to check the far pasture. The horse beneath her shifted and snorted, testing her balance. He watched closely at first, then eased back when he saw she could manage. The ride was long and quiet, broken only by the sound of hooves and wind. Out there, with nothing but open land in every direction, she felt both small and strangely grounded. They stopped near the river, water running fast and dark from the recent rain. He dismounted and checked the fence line while she stayed back, watching him work. There was a tension in his movements she could not name, a wariness that surfaced when he scanned the trees along the bank. When she asked if something was wrong, he said the river had a way of taking things if you were not careful. The words felt like a warning meant for more than just the water. As the weeks passed, she learned the ranch carried stories in its bones, old tools tucked away in corners, a collapsed shed no one bothered to rebuild, a locked room in the house that stayed closed no matter the season. She did not ask about these things directly, but she felt them, the way you feel a storm building before the first drop falls. People from town came by occasionally, a man delivering feed, a woman dropping off mail that had piled up at the post office. They spoke to the rancher with familiarity, but kept their distance from her, eyes flicking toward her and then away. When she asked who they were, he gave names but little else. It was clear the ranch had its own place in the town's memory, and not all of it was kind. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she found an old photograph tucked into a drawer while setting the table. It showed the ranch years ago, fields fuller, the house brighter. A younger version of the rancher stood in the center, his expression softer, an arm slung around someone whose face had been scratched out. The marks were deliberate, deep enough to tear the paper. Her chest tightened as she slipped the photo back where she found it. That night the wind returned, stronger than before. It rattled windows and pushed against the house like it wanted inside. She sat at the table, listening, while the rancher checked the doors and shutters. When he passed by, she asked about the photograph. The room seemed to still. He did not stop moving, but his shoulders stiffened. He said some things were better left buried. The finality in his voice closed the door on further questions. Despite the distance he kept, moments slipped through. A shared smile when a stubborn calf finally settled. a quiet laugh when she nearly lost her footing in the mud. Those moments felt fragile, easily broken, and she held on to them carefully. Each one made the silence between them heavier, charged with things neither of them was ready to say. She began to realize she was not the only one being tested by the ranch. The land tested him too, every day, asking if he was still willing to stand his ground. There were nights she heard him pacing long after dark, boots moving across the porch, stopping, starting again. She wondered what kept him awake, what memories pressed in when the world grew quiet. One afternoon, a stranger drove up the long road leading to the house. The sound of the engine carried far across the fields, sharp and out of place. The rancher stiffened, eyes narrowing as he watched the vehicle approach. She felt the shift immediately, the way the air changed when trouble stepped close. He told her to stay inside, his tone leaving no room for argument. From the window, she watched as he met the stranger near the gate. Their conversation was low but tense, gestures sharp. She could not hear the words, but she saw the way the rancher's hands clenched, the way he positioned himself between the man and the house. When the stranger finally drove away, dust trailing behind him, the land seemed to exhale. That evening, the rancher was quieter than usual. Whatever the stranger had said lingered, casting a shadow over the house. She wanted to ask, to understand what threats moved beneath the surface of this place. Instead, she waited, feeling the weight of things she did not yet know. As night fell, she stepped outside again, drawn by the same pull that had brought her there on her first evening. The stars were muted now, clouds creeping back in. The rancher joined her without a word, leaning against the porch rail. They stood side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to keep their walls intact. She thought about the words he had spoken in the barn, about silence and breath, and what it meant to choose one over the other. Her life before the ranch had been full of noise, full of trying to be heard. Here, she was learning the power of holding back, of listening to what was not said. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of rain and something sharper, like warning. The rancher looked out over the land, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. She followed his gaze, sensing that whatever lay ahead was already moving toward them. The tension that had settled between them did not ease. It deepened, stretching into the night, waiting for the moment it would demand to be faced. The next morning arrived under a sky that could not decide what it wanted to be. Clouds drifted slow and low, breaking just enough to let pale light through. The ranch felt restless, as if the land itself had overheard something it was not meant to hear. She sensed it while pulling on her boots, the quiet humming beneath everything, the same feeling that had followed the stranger's visit. Work carried on as usual, but nothing felt ordinary. The rancher gave instructions with fewer words than before, his focus sharp and distant. When he mounted his horse, she noticed the way his hand lingered on the reins, knuckles pale. He told her he would be gone most of the day checking the north boundary. The way he said it made her wonder if the land up there held more than broken fence posts. Left alone, she took care of the house and the nearer pastures. The routine helped steady her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation she had only half seen by the gate. Whoever that stranger was, he had not come out of curiosity. He had come with purpose, and that purpose was tied to the ranch in a way she did not yet understand. By midday, the wind shifted again, carrying distant sounds across the fields. She paused in her work, listening. For a moment, she thought she heard voices, then the sound faded, swallowed by the open land. She reminded herself how sound traveled strangely out here, how the ranch played tricks on those who were not used to its ways. In the afternoon, she rode out toward the river alone. The water had dropped some since the storm, but it still moved fast, dark, and cold. She stayed near the bank, careful not to step too close. That was when she noticed fresh tracks in the mud. Boot prints. Not the rancher's. They were narrower, unfamiliar, heading away from the river and into the trees. A chill settled in her chest as she studied them. She followed the tracks only a short distance before stopping. Curiosity tugged at her, but instinct warned her back. Whatever business had brought someone here did not belong to her yet. She turned back toward the house, feeling the weight of the land pressing in from all sides. The rancher returned just before sunset. His horse was lathered, its sides dark with sweat. He dismounted without a word and led the animal toward the barn. She watched him closely, reading the tension in his movements. When she mentioned the tracks by the river, his head snapped up, eyes sharp. He asked her where she had seen them, his voice low. She told him, careful to keep her tone steady. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once and told her she had done right by not following them. There was something like relief in his expression, quickly buried beneath resolve. That night, sleep did not come easily for either of them. She lay awake, listening to the wind press against the house. From time to time, she heard him moving outside, checking locks, scanning the dark. The ranch felt smaller under the weight of whatever had begun to stir. Over the next few days, the tension grew sharper. More signs appeared. A gate left ajar. A fence post loosened where it had been firm before. Each discovery tightened the knot in her stomach. When she brought them to the rancher's attention, he acknowledged them with a grim nod, saying little else. She began to understand that the ranch was caught in a struggle that had started long before she arrived. This land, with its wide skies and quiet strength, was not just a place to live. It was something to be claimed, defended, and sometimes taken by force. The rancher carried that weight like an old injury, one that flared when tested. One evening, they sat together at the table longer than usual. The food went untouched as the clock marked time between them. Finally, she asked what he was fighting for. The question was simple, but it cut deep. He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to say. He spoke of land disputes that went back years, of promises broken and lines crossed, of people who believed time gave them the right to reclaim what they once lost. He did not name names, but she understood enough to see the shape of the conflict. The ranch was more than property. It was proof. Proof that some battles were not won by walking away. As he talked, she saw another side of him. Not just the quiet rancher shaped by routine, but a man who had stood his ground when it would have been easier to leave. The realization stirred something in her, a mix of admiration and fear. Standing firm came with a cost, and she wondered how much he had already paid. The days grew hotter, the sun pressing down harder. With the heat came tempers, short and sharp. They argued once, a small disagreement over a broken tool that quickly became about more than that. Words rose, then stopped. The silence afterward felt heavy, but different than before. Less guarded, more honest. That night, she stepped out onto the porch again. The stars were hidden, the sky thick with clouds. The rancher joined her, leaning on the rail like before. They did not speak at first. The air between them carried everything they had not said, all the questions waiting for answers. She told him she had not come to the ranch by accident. She spoke of leaving something behind, of needing a place where noise could not follow her. He listened without interrupting, his presence steady. When she finished, he said the ranch had a way of pulling in people who needed to learn how to listen. The words stayed with her. Late one night, she woke to the sound of a vehicle. The engine idled briefly before cutting out. Her heart raced as she slipped from bed and moved toward the window. Headlights swept across the field, then disappeared. She did not see who stepped out, but she felt the intent in the air, sharp and unwelcome. The rancher was already outside when she reached the door. He motioned for her to stay back, his posture rigid. She watched from the shadows as he moved toward the edge of the property, every step deliberate. Voices murmured, low and tense, carried by the wind. She caught fragments of words, but not enough to understand. When the vehicle finally drove away, leaving the night quiet once more, she felt a tremor run through her. The rancher returned, his expression unreadable. He told her it was nothing she needed to worry about, but the lie sat heavy between them. She nodded anyway, understanding that some truths demanded patience. In the days that followed, the ranch felt watched. She sensed it in the way birds startled from trees, in the way cattle shifted uneasily. The land was alert, waiting. She began to realize that staying here meant more than learning the work. It meant choosing a side in a conflict that had already claimed its ground. Through it all, the bond between her and the rancher deepened in quiet ways. Shared looks, unspoken understanding. A trust built not from promises, but from standing side by side when the world pressed close. Yet beneath that connection lay the tension that neither of them dared to touch fully. One afternoon, she found herself standing at the fence line again, staring out across the land. The rancher joined her, his presence familiar now. She asked him what would happen if the fight came to a head. He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was steady but heavy. He said the land would remember who stood for it and who tried to take without earning. The words sounded like a belief shaped by loss. She followed his gaze across the fields, understanding that whatever was coming would test more than just ownership. It would test loyalty, resolve, and the fragile peace they had built. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ranch, she felt the pull of a choice she was not yet ready to make. The conflict was closing in, tightening its grip. The land waited, the rancher stood firm, and she found herself caught between the past she had fled and the future that was demanding her attention. The tension did not break. It settled deeper, promising that what lay ahead would change everything. The air shifted in the days that followed, thick with expectation. It was not just the weather or the uneasy signs along the fences. It was the way the rancher moved now, more alert, less forgiving of small mistakes. It was the way she felt it too, a tightening in her chest each morning when she stepped outside and scanned the land. The ranch no longer felt like a refuge alone. It felt like a place bracing itself. They worked longer hours, pushing themselves harder. The rancher began riding out before dawn. Returning after sunset with dust on his clothes and questions in his eyes he did not voice. She took on more responsibility without being asked, learning to read the land the way he did. She noticed changes faster now. A crow circling too long, tire marks faint but fresh near the edge of the property. Each detail added to the quiet pressure building between them. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle the windows, and rain came down hard, flattening the dust into dark streaks. They were caught outside when it hit, forced to take shelter in the equipment shed near the far field. The space was tight, filled with the smell of oil and wet earth. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the walls, throwing sharp light across his face. In that brief brightness, she saw how tired he was, not just from the work, but from carrying the weight of what was coming. The sight stirred something in her, a need to say more than she had allowed herself before. She told him she was not afraid of hard things, but she had faced worse than broken fences and angry men. Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. He listened, rain pounding the roof above them. When she finished, he said this fight was not one he wanted anyone else pulled into. The words were meant to protect, but they landed like a barrier. She told him staying silent did not mean staying safe. The storm roared on, and the space between them felt charged with everything they were not saying. The rain finally eased, leaving the world raw and slick. They returned to the house without another word, each lost in thought. That night, sleep was shallow and restless. She dreamed of the land split by invisible lines, of standing in the middle unsure which side would claim her. The next morning brought news. A notice nailed to the old post near the gate, paper flapping in the breeze. She found it while checking the fence, her stomach dropping as she read the formal language. Claims, deadlines, demands dressed up as law. She tore it down and carried it back to the house, hands trembling. The rancher read it once, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with resolve. He said this was the move he had been expecting. The final push. Hearing it spoken aloud made the threat real in a way signs and strangers had not. The ranch was no longer being tested quietly. It was being challenged outright. Word spread fast. More visitors from town arrived, some offering support, others thinly veiled warnings. Old grievances surfaced, stories half told and carefully shaped. She listened, learning how deeply rooted the conflict was. The ranch stood on history layered thick with pride and regret. Choosing to defend it meant stepping into all of that. As pressure mounted, their connection deepened in ways neither had planned. They spoke more openly now, sharing pieces of themselves that had been guarded for years. She told him about the life she had left behind, about the noise that had driven her away and the quiet she had been searching for. He spoke of the ranch not as land alone, but as a promise made to himself long ago. A promise he refused to break. One late afternoon, they rode out together to the highest ridge on the property. From there, the ranch stretched out beneath them, fields glowing gold in the sinking sun. The view stole her breath. Standing beside him, she felt the pull of belonging stronger than ever. This place had worked its way into her, rooting deep. He asked her then, quietly, why she stayed. The question carried more weight than it seemed. She answered honestly, saying she stayed because the ranch had taught her how to breathe again, because standing here felt like standing in truth. He looked at her for a long moment, the tension between them softening just enough to let something warmer through. But the calm did not last. That night, another vehicle approached, headlights cutting through the dark. This time, there was no attempt at subtlety. Voices rose, sharp and demanding. She stood at the window, heart racing, watching as the rancher stepped forward, firm and unyielding. The land seemed to lean in, listening. She could not hear the words clearly, but she understood the stakes. Lines were being drawn, not just on paper, but in spirit. When the men finally left, their anger trailing behind them, the rancher returned to the house slower than before. She met him at the door, searching his face. He told her the next few days would decide everything, that there would be pressure, maybe worse. He said she could leave if she wanted, no judgment, no hard feelings. The offer was sincere, but it cut deeper than any demand. She felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders. She spent that night pacing the porch, staring out at the dark fields. Leaving would mean safety, distance from a fight that was not hers by birth. Staying meant risk, uncertainty, and a future tied to a land under threat. As dawn approached, she realized the ranch had already changed her. Walking away would mean losing something she could not name but deeply felt. By morning, she had made her decision, though she did not speak it aloud yet. Instead, she threw herself into the work, moving with purpose. The rancher watched her closely, reading her resolve in her actions. He did not comment, but something shifted between them, an understanding settling in. The final days before the deadline were heavy with anticipation. Meetings were held, papers reviewed. The rancher stood firm against every challenge, his resolve unshaken. She stood with him, offering quiet support, her presence a steady anchor. Together they faced each test, each attempt to unsettle them. On the eve of what felt like the turning point, they sat together on the porch as the sun dipped low. The sky burned with color, a reminder of beauty even in moments of strain. She reached out, resting her hand near his, not quite touching. The simple closeness spoke volumes. He told her whatever happened next, the ranch had already given him something he thought he had lost. Hope, shaped in an unexpected way. She felt her throat tighten, emotion rising but held in check. The tension between them was no longer just about land or conflict. It was about what they were building together, piece by piece. As night settled in, the land grew quiet again, holding its breath, Tomorrow promised confrontation, answers, and change. She lay awake, listening to the steady sounds of the ranch around her, heart pounding with anticipation. The climax was close, pressing in from all sides, and though the outcome remained uncertain, one truth was clear. Whatever came next would not break them easily. Morning broke clear and still, the kind of calm that feels earned after a long night of waiting. The sky held a soft blue, and the land lay open and quiet, as if giving space for what was about to happen. She stepped onto the porch and breathed in deep, feeling steady for the first time in days. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. By mid-morning, trucks lined the edge of the property. Men and women stepped out, some familiar from town, others strangers with stiff smiles and folded papers. The rancher stood near the gate, calm and grounded, his boots planted firm in the dirt. She took her place beside him without being asked. That simple act spoke louder than any promise. The discussion lasted hours. Voices rose and fell, arguments laid bare in the open air. Claims were made, countered, and weighed. Old documents were passed around, hands trembling with the weight of history. She watched the rancher closely, saw how he spoke with quiet certainty, never rushed, never defensive. He did not argue to win. He spoke to tell the truth. When doubt crept in, support stepped forward. A neighbor who remembered the land being worked honestly year after year. A woman from town who spoke of boundaries respected and hands shaken in good faith. Piece by piece, the story came together, not just of ownership, but of care. Of a ranch that had been tended, not taken. The turning point came quietly. A final paper was read aloud, its language clear and firm. The claims against the ranch fell apart under scrutiny, built more on old bitterness than fact. Silence followed, heavy and complete. Then someone nodded. Another followed. The challenge dissolved, not with shouting, but with acceptance. Relief washed through her so suddenly she had to steady herself. The rancher exhaled, shoulders easing for the first time she could remember. He thanked those who had stood with him, his voice steady but warm. The land seemed to respond, wind stirring gently through the grass as if in approval. By afternoon, the trucks were gone. The gate stood open, unchallenged. The ranch returned to its familiar quiet, but it felt different now. Lighter, safer. She and the rancher walked the property together, checking fences more out of habit than need. Each step felt like reclaiming something precious. They stopped near the river, the water calm and bright under the sun. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just strength, but gratitude. He thanked her for staying, for standing beside him when it mattered. She told him she had not stayed out of obligation. She stayed because the ranch had become home. That evening, they shared a meal that tasted richer than any before. The clock still ticked, but it no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like time moving forward. They talked easily now, laughter slipping in where silence once held tight. The house felt fuller, warmer. As days turned into weeks, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Repairs were finished. Fences stood straight and strong. The land healed where it had been strained. Visitors came again, this time with open smiles and easy conversation. The ranch no longer felt watched. It felt respected. She found herself taking on a role she had not planned, helping with decisions, riding out alone with confidence. The rancher trusted her judgment, valued her voice. The quiet between them became comfortable, filled with understanding rather than restraint. One afternoon, they returned to the ridge overlooking the fields. The view was just as breathtaking, but it felt different now. Secure, promising. He told her the ranch had taught him something too. That holding on did not always mean standing alone. Sometimes it meant letting someone in. She reached for his hand then, no hesitation, no fear. He held it, firm and warm, grounding as the land beneath their feet. There was no need for grand words. The moment held everything they needed. The locked room in the house was opened at last. Inside were memories, some painful, some tender. They faced them together, honoring what had been and making space for what was ahead. The photograph with the scratched face was placed back in a drawer, no longer a wound, just a reminder of how far he had come. Seasons shifted. The ranch bloomed in spring, fields alive with color and sound. She realized how deeply rooted she had become, how the land had shaped her as surely as it had shaped him. The noise she once ran from felt distant now, replaced by purpose and peace. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned gold, they sat on the porch side by side. The wind moved softly through the grass, familiar and kind. She leaned into him, feeling safe, certain. The ranch stood strong around them, not just as land, but as a life built with care, trust, and patience. The conflicts that once threatened it had faded, leaving behind clarity and connection. What remained was simple and lasting. As night settled in and the stars came out, she realized she no longer needed to run or argue to be heard. Here, on this ranch, her breath was steady, her voice valued, and her heart at home.